Mr. Swalwell, did you hear through third parties other than General Flynn about efforts to work with the Russians around UN Security Council resolutions on Israel or sanctions against Russia? Mr. Dearborn, no, sir. At that time, I had a lot of moving parts of the transition to deal with. Swalwell, did any of those parts involve how to respond or embrace the Obama administration's December 28th sanctions put in place against Russia? Dearborn, so, again, that would have been kind of the national security team. Swalwell, okay. Were you ever at Mar-a-Lago during the transition? Dearborn, I've never been to Mar-a-Lago. Swalwell, are you familiar with who was at Mar-a-Lago over the time period of December 28th, 29th, and 30th on the transition team? Dearborn, short of whatever may have come out in stories that listed who was there, probably not. Swalwell, was that something that would have come under your duties as executive director, to just at least organize or account for whereabouts of transition team members during days leading up to the transition? Dearborn, I guess it would depend upon who the transition member was. Swalwell, how about General Flynn? Dearborn, I didn't keep track of General Flynn's activities. Swalwell, how about Jared Kushner? Dearborn, I didn't keep track of Jared's activities either. Swalwell, how about Reince Priebus? Dearborn, Reince and I met on different occasions about a lot of different things, but he was kind of working on a separate issue, which was kind of the White House organization. And that was kind of his piece of the transition. So, no. Swalwell, how about Stephen Miller during the transition? Dearborn, yeah, during the transition. Miller was very active, working on speeches and work product. So, yeah, he was right around the corner from me, so I saw him a lot. Swalwell, are you familiar as to whether he was at Mar-a-Lago at the end of December? Dearborn, I'm not, but if you say he was there, I wouldn't be surprised. If the candidate was preparing for a speech or something, that would make sense. Swalwell, how about K.T. McFarland? Dearborn, again, that would be kind of in the Flynn national security bucket. Swalwell, would that be the same for Keith Kellogg? Dearborn, yes. Swalwell, as executive director during the transition, were you aware of any efforts by the Russian government, Vladimir Putin, Russia's ambassador to the United States, to reach out in a formal way to the transition? Dearborn, to the transition? No. But if they were reaching out, they probably would have gone through maybe the policy team, is my guess. Swalwell, who would that have been? Dearborn, so Otto Machida was the head of kind of the policy team. Swalwell, how do you spell that? Dearborn, I think it's Machida. Swalwell, okay. Dearborn, and foreign policy and domestic policy would have been handled there. So if there were overtures, possibly. We also had an Office of Public Engagement that Ken Hagian, parentheses PH, and Dan Murphy. So entities that wanted to come in and get an audience with different people would come in. And we had a little auditorium, and so we had some meetings. But, to be honest, most of our meetings were kind of all around town at different places. Swalwell, Were you familiar with a trip on January 11th, 2017, during the transition that Eric Prince took to the Seychelles? Dearborn, only by accounts in the papers. Swalwell, okay. Did you know Eric Prince prior to this trip? Dearborn, no, sir. Swalwell, did anyone on the campaign or transition talk about upcoming trips or post-trip readouts of Eric Prince's travels to the Seychelles? Dearborn, not to my knowledge. Swalwell, to your knowledge, did anyone in the White House ever discuss, either directly to you or around you, a desire to remove or weaken sanctions against Russia based on agreements reached before the inauguration or during the transition? Dearborn, can you repeat that question? Swalwell, yeah. Did anyone around you or to you, at the White House or in the transition team, discuss a desire to remove or weaken sanctions against Russia based on U.S. sanctions put in place after the election? Dearborn, no, not with me. Swalwell, did you hear about this? Dearborn, if anything was reported on it, I probably would have read something. Swalwell, were you aware of any efforts by, now we're talking about the Trump administration, by the Trump administration to direct U.S. government agencies to review U.S.-Russia policy to facilitate a change in relations? Dearborn, can you say that again? I'm so sorry. Swalwell, are you aware of any efforts by the administration to direct U.S. government agencies to review U.S.-Russia policy to facilitate a change in U.S.-Russia relations? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, so January 20th, 2017, you become Deputy Chief of Staff. Is that right? Dearborn, correct. Swalwell, what were your responsibilities? Dearborn, Cabinet Affairs. Swalwell, what are your responsibilities? Dearborn, they still remain the same, although I gained 2 additional ones after Chief of Staff Kelly came on board. So on January 20th, my responsibilities were legislative affairs, cabinet affairs, and intergovernmental. I also have political affairs and the Office of Public Liaison, but I haven't had those since. I've had those since Kelly came on, about 2 or 3 weeks after he came on board. Swalwell, do you have a seat on the Deputies Committee for the National Security Council? Dearborn, I do not. Swalwell, to your knowledge, has it been past practice that Deputy Chiefs of Staff would have a seat on that council? Dearborn, yes. Swalwell, why not? Dearborn, because there's another Deputy Chief of Staff. Swalwell, who is that? Dearborn, Joe Hagan. Swalwell, does Joe have a seat on that? Dearborn, I believe he does, but as the Chief's deputy, right? Swalwell, right. Have you ever been involved at the White House in discussing U.S.-Russia relations? Dearborn, U.S.-Russia relations? Not in any depth. Swalwell, what has been discussed that you've been involved in? Dearborn, on U.S.-Russia relations. Swalwell, yes. Dearborn, I've been in meetings when there's been an overview of the things that we're doing. Kind of a windshield tour around the world. This is what's going on this week. Here's what we're working on. I'm sure that at some point in time, there was probably some discussion of, quote, we're doing this with this country, unquote. China, Russia, whatever, but nothing specific to Russia. Swalwell, to your knowledge, who has been involved in the conversations about U.S.-Russia relations? Dearborn, in the administration? Swalwell, if you know. Dearborn, the National Security Council predominantly, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. I would assume, that would be their domain. But I want to be clear. I'm not answering that they are talking about X. Swalwell, sure. Dearborn, I'm just saying if you're asking who would do it, that's who would do it. Swalwell, okay. February 2017. It's been reported that General Flynn received Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Felix Sater, and Ukrainian politician Andrei Artemenko at the White House. Were you familiar with this meeting? Dearborn, no, sir. Swalwell, do you know who Michael Cohen is? Dearborn, you mean the Trump Organization lawyer Michael Cohen? Swalwell, yes. Dearborn, I know who he is. Swalwell, okay. Did you meet him while you were working on the campaign? Dearborn, I did meet him in Trump Tower at one point. Swalwell, okay. How many times have you interacted with him? Dearborn, maybe once or twice. The first time was, hey, it's nice to meet you. Kind of a, how you doing? I've only met him. I met him to say hello, and maybe on 2 other occasions, just kind of in passing. Swalwell, when did you start working out of Trump Tower? Dearborn, I went up along with a small group from the Washington office about a week and a half prior to the election, but I went up on weekends. Swalwell, and did you stay there throughout the transition? Dearborn, once the transition happened, then my status changed as a Senate staffer to be detailed to the transition. I was tapped executive director several days after the election and pretty much stayed there until about 1.5 to 2 weeks before the inauguration. Swalwell, what did you observe Michael Cohen's role to be in the campaign? Dearborn, I didn't see a real role, to be honest. I never interacted with him. Like I said, I met him a couple of times. He was a nice guy, but I had no interaction with him. Swalwell, were you aware that Michael Cohen was in contact with Felix Sater throughout the campaign in efforts to arrange to 1. Build a Trump Tower in Moscow, but to 2. Get Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump together? Dearborn, I don't even know who Felix Sater is. Swalwell, okay, so you're not familiar with that effort. Dearborn, nope. Swalwell, were you familiar with efforts by Michael Cohen to arrange visas for Donald Trump to travel to an economic summit in Russia in summer of 2016? Dearborn, no, I wasn't familiar with that. Swalwell, how about Paul Manafort? Did you ever see him at the White House once you were working there? Dearborn, no, because he'd been let go before the end of the campaign. I didn't see him at the White House that I can remember. Swalwell, but did he stay in contact with Mr. Trump or any of the senior principals of the campaign? Dearborn, that would be a great question for them, but I don't know. Swalwell, okay, to your knowledge, the answer is no. Dearborn, yeah, I'm sorry. No, sir. Swalwell, were you working at the White House on May 9th, 2017, still part of the team? Mr. Dearborn, should have been. Mr. Swalwell, did you have any foreknowledge of President Trump's firing of James Comey? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, would any part of that discussion come under? Would any part of that decision come under your responsibilities? Dearborn, absolutely not. Swalwell, okay. Were you aware that it was about to happen? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, up until May 9th, 2017. So think about the first time that you joined the campaign up until May 9th of 2017. Did you ever hear candidate Trump or President-elect Trump or President Trump express any opinion about James Comey? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, during the transition period, did you discuss the future of any of the prior administration officials who would be held over, like the National Security Advisor, the FBI Director, individuals like that who had long-term appointments? Dearborn, not them per se, but yes, we of course talked about holdovers in terms of continuity of government. That was part of the transition. You had to identify who were key individuals for certain positions, and a whole slate were asked if they could stay on board for an interim period. Swalwell, and that included, of individuals asked to stay on board, James Comey. Is that right? Dearborn, yeah, it may have, but it was government-wide, so it was combing kind of all the agencies. Swalwell, and for sign-off on that, did you have to go to the president-elect? Dearborn, I don't know if. I'll be really honest with you. I don't know if he ultimately signed off. He very well could have. I think we put a list together and then, Rintz was tapped as chief of staff, and so we would take final decisions like that to him. He would ask us questions about it. Why do these people need to be tapped? Well, here's the reason why. FAA, all these different things. Things have to keep, working. But I don't recall that list would necessarily have to have the president sign off. It was a necessary continuity function of government. Swalwell, have you ever heard Jared Kushner express an opinion, campaign, transition, White House, on James Comey? Dearborn, I have not. Swalwell, did you hear any time during your part of the campaign, transition, or at the White House, any individual advocate for the firing of James Comey? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, were you shocked when he was fired? Dearborn, surprised, like anyone else. Swalwell, why were you surprised? Dearborn, I think any time a high-profile individual is fired, it's probably a surprising event. Swalwell, as Deputy Chief of Staff, were you aware of who would come in and out of the Oval Office? Dearborn, that was Oval Office operations that fell underneath Joe Hagan. I was not in charge of Oval Office operations. Swalwell, and did Keith Schiller fall under Joe Hagan's responsibilities? Dearborn, he did. Swalwell, is your office over in OEOB, or are you at the West Wing? Dearborn, second floor of the West Wing. Swalwell, it's pretty good real estate. Dearborn, it's not bad. Swalwell, yeah. Are you familiar with the May 10th meeting at the White House where Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with President Trump at the Oval Office? Dearborn, only the news reports. I think maybe the day or two after it happened. Swalwell, did you see them at the White House? Dearborn, I didn't. Swalwell, did Donald Trump ever talk to you after that meeting about what occurred? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, did you talk with anyone who was in the meeting after it occurred? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, on January 27th, the same day as George Papadopoulos was first approached by the FBI, But later that day, Donald Trump calls James Comey and invites him over to the White House for a private dinner. Dearborn, okay. Swalwell, were you at the White House that day? Dearborn, I'm sure I was. Swalwell, did you see James Comey come over for dinner? Dearborn, I did not. Swalwell, are you aware of who was in that dinner with the president, if anyone else? Dearborn, I wouldn't have known. It would have been listed on the schedule, probably. Mr. Swalwell, did you ever talk to the president after that January 27th dinner with James Comey? Mr. Dearborn, I did not. Swalwell, on February 14th. Caulfield, just for purposes of the record, I just want to clarify. He's absolutely spoken to the president since that dinner, but not about this. Dearborn, oh yes, I'm sorry, I thought that was implied. Caulfield, I just didn't want the record to imply that he hadn't talked to the president since that day. Swalwell, yeah, it's good to make that clear. Dearborn, I am not going to apologize for being a non-lawyer. I'm telling you that now, but that's what I meant. Caulfield, I just didn't want this transcript to look. Swalwell, February 14th. Are you familiar with what has now been testified to in Congress and reported by the press of a February 14th meeting with Reince Priebus, Attorney General Sessions, James Comey, Jared Kushner, and Donald Trump in the Oval Office? Dearborn, press reports? Sure. Swalwell, okay, you were at the White House that day. Dearborn, yes, sir. Swalwell, were you aware that that meeting was to occur? Dearborn, it may have been on the schedule. Swalwell, and did you look at the schedule day after day? Dearborn, everybody there looks at the schedule every day. Yes, sir. But to be clear, the schedule, you know, meeting with X, it doesn't tell you a lot. Swalwell, did President Trump ever tell you anything about that February 14th meeting? Dearborn, no, he did not. Swalwell, did you talk to any of the participants of that meeting about what occurred that day? Dearborn, I don't believe so. Swalwell, on March 30th, it's been testified to by James Comey and acknowledged by President Trump that there was a phone call between President Trump and then FBI Director James Comey. Did you ever get a readout from President Trump about his phone call with James Comey on March 30th? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, did you ever talk to anyone else who was familiar with the call about that call? Dearborn, not to my knowledge. Swalwell, the same question for April 11th, testified to by James Comey, acknowledged by Donald Trump, a telephone call. Did you ever talk to Donald Trump about that telephone call? Dearborn, no, sir. Swalwell, did you ever talk to anyone who was familiar with the call? Dearborn, not to my knowledge. Swalwell, on March 20th, 2017, Director Comey appeared before our committee in an open hearing and confirmed for the first time that the FBI had an active criminal and counterintelligence investigation. Do you remember that day? Dearborn, yes, sir. Swalwell, were you with the president when that testimony occurred? Dearborn, when Comey's actual testimony occurred. Swalwell, yeah. Dearborn, no. Swalwell, or do you know if he watched it? Dearborn, I wouldn't know. Swalwell, did he ever say anything to you that day or in the days after about James Comey's testimony? Dearborn, he did not. Swalwell, did anyone familiar with the president's feelings say anything about how the president reacted to James Comey's testimony that day? Dearborn, not to my knowledge. Swalwell, did you ever talk to Attorney General Sessions about James Comey? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, even all the way up to today. Dearborn, I mean, he always liked Comey. We've talked about that, but I have no date stamp on that, so... Swalwell, Attorney General Sessions, if you recall, recused himself from the Russia investigation. Prior to Attorney General Sessions making that decision, did you talk with Attorney General Sessions about making that decision? Dearborn, I don't. So there's a Mukasey memo that we're told about up front. The answer is no, but it's because of the Mukasey memo. And Don McGahn was pretty clear. I deal with the Attorney General, unless it was some policy on the Hill. Swalwell, wait, can you say that again? That Don McGahn deals with the Attorney General, not you? Dearborn, yeah. That's the details of the Mukasey memo, which kind of applies to all of us in the West Wing. Swalwell, okay, so your testimony is that prior to Attorney General Sessions' decision to recuse, you did not talk to him about that decision. Dearborn, no, we didn't discuss that. No. Swalwell, post-recusal, have you ever talked to Attorney General Sessions about his recusal? Dearborn, I'm sure that I have, but I'm sure it was light. It wasn't like in-depth. Swalwell, like how light? What was said? Dearborn, probably something to the effect of, if the lawyers gave you the advice, you did the right thing, kind of deal. Swalwell, do you think he did the right thing? Dearborn, I think the Attorney General always follows the law. Swalwell, recently, a book was published by Michael Wolff called Fire and Fury, where there's an account of a meeting between Attorney General Sessions and Deputy Attorney General Rob Rosenstein during the first week of May of 2017. According to the book, the president had a ranting meeting with Sessions and his deputy, Rosenstein. It was a humiliating meeting, according to the book, for both men, with Donald Trump insisting they couldn't control their own people and pushing them to find a reason to fire Comey. In effect, he blamed them, the book said, for not having come up with that reason months ago. Were you aware that this meeting took place? Dearborn, I'm certain the meeting took place. Swalwell, okay, why are you certain? Dearborn, well, if it was on the schedule. I'm not certain. I'm not aware that it took place. You were saying that it did, then it probably did. Swalwell, yeah, I'm giving you, the account of the book. The book alleges. Dearborn, I didn't read that passage. Caulfield, that's not the question. The question is, were you aware of the meeting that was described in the book? Dearborn, just by accounts, yeah. Swalwell, okay. By accounts in the book or the press? Dearborn, by press. Swalwell, did anyone in the White House discuss this meeting? Dearborn, not in any detail. Swalwell, what was discussed? Dearborn, I think the only thing I heard may have been that there was a tense meeting with the Attorney General. Swalwell, what did you hear about Donald Trump's feelings about the Attorney General being able to find a reason to fire Comey? Dearborn, what do you mean? Swalwell, did you ever hear anything about that? Dearborn, well, I think everybody had an opinion about it, but I mean no one. Caulfield, the question is, did you hear anything about the president's? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, did you learn why individuals around you believed it was a tense meeting? Dearborn, did I learn why? Swalwell, like what made it tense? Dearborn, I think it was just people's opinion based on accounts that they would have received, but I didn't receive firsthand. Swalwell, who had expressed this to you? Dearborn, everybody that knew that I worked for Jeff Sessions, probably. Swalwell, okay. Who do you recall expressing that to you? Dearborn, I mean probably a myriad of different people. Swalwell, right. And just to your recollection, which individuals? Dearborn, not really the senior staff. I mean people that were maybe assistants to the president. But, just hearing in passing. More so when accounts come out in the press, right? Swalwell, right. Let me back up. President Trump knew that you had worked for Senator Sessions. Is that right? Dearborn, I'm certain he was aware of that. Swalwell, has he ever acknowledged that to you? Dearborn, directly? Swalwell, hey, you're Sessions' guy, or in some way acknowledging that he knows that you were linked to Sessions. Dearborn, I don't know if he's ever called me Sessions' guy. Swalwell, and I don't mean like that. I mean, did he ever acknowledge in some way that, you were on the Sessions team or you came from Sessions, some way for you to know that he knows? Dearborn, maybe really early on, but he never really said, you're a Sessions guy. Swalwell, has he ever expressed to you any opinions about Attorney General Sessions, President Trump? Mr. Dearborn, yeah, but they've always been positive. Mr. Swalwell, okay. Has President Trump ever expressed to you any opinions about or any thoughts about the Russia investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, has President Trump ever expressed to you any opinions or thoughts about Bob Mueller's investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, on page 212 of the Fire and Fury book, there's a passage about another discussion at the White House, same week. The book says, in quotes, there was a meeting that included the president, Jared and Ivanka, Bannon, Priebus, and White House counsel Don McGahn. It was closed door, widely noted because it was unusual for the Oval Office door ever to be closed. Does this meeting ring a bell? Dearborn, nope. Swalwell, have you ever talked to the president about the Russia investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, have you ever talked to Jared Kushner about the Russia investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, have you ever talked with Ivanka Trump about the Russia investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, have you ever talked with Don McGahn about the Russia investigation? Dearborn, no. Swalwell, have you ever talked to anyone at the White House about your testimony today? Dearborn, White House counsel. Swalwell, and what did you express to White House counsel? Dearborn, I'm going to go testify before the House Intel Committee. Swalwell, are you under any direction from the White House to refrain from answering any questions from this committee? Dearborn, none whatsoever. Swalwell, On June 7th, 2016, which is 2 days before the widely known Trump Tower meeting with Don Jr., candidate Trump announced at a campaign event, "I'm going to give a major speech probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all the things that have been taking place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very interesting." Do you recall candidate Trump making that statement, kind of teasing a release of information on Hillary Clinton? Dearborn: Yeah, vaguely. Swalwell: Okay. Did you know what he was referring to? Dearborn: No. Swalwell: Do you know whether Stephen Miller wrote that speech or if it was the president speaking ad hoc? Dearborn: I wouldn't know for sure. No. Swalwell: On June 9th, 2016, Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner met with individuals from Russia and who had arranged the meeting at Trump's tower. Were you aware that that meeting took place? Dearborn: No. Swalwell: When did you first become aware of that meeting? Dearborn: Reports in the press. Swalwell: Did you ever talk to anyone at the White House after reports in the press about the meeting? Mr. Dearborn: No, not really.